I was standing by the kitchen window this morning, watching the steam ribbon up from my mug of Maxwell House and listening to that old countertop radio warble Patsy Cline's Sweet Dreams, when a frayed memory tugged at my sleeve the way a grandbaby does when they want a cookie. Funny how a simple smell of coffee and a half-key-off melody can prise open a door you thought was nailed shut forever. My name is Dolores Peterson. Folks call me Dolly, and I'm 67 winters young, though my bones do creak louder than the floorboards in that drafty Illinois house where I raised my little ones. Back in 1983, I was 31, hair big as a Sunday bouffant, hands full of laundry and hopes, living in Mama's old place with my husband Roy, 5-year-old David, 3-year-old Lynn, and Mama herself muttering, "Something's walking these halls, I swear it." Lord, that woman could sniff out a secret like a hound on a rabbit trail. Now, lean in close, honey, 'cause this part's important. Oh, and sweetie, if my little porch tail already has you leaning in, tap that tiny thumbs up below for me, would you? Maybe jot a line about the oddest thing you've ever heard in an old house. And if you feel neighborly, click subscribe so we can sit together again. All right, where was I? Ah, the attic. Every so often, a shiver of floor dust would sift down through the ceiling vent, or a can of peaches would vanish from the pantry, and we'd blame mice or kids or plain forgetfulness. Anything but the impossible. Still, sometimes at 3:17 on the dot, the pipes would groan like a church organ, and I'd swear someone was humming a lullaby just above the rafters. Roy said the house was settling. Mama crossed herself and whispered prayers. I just pushed another log in the gas heater, hugged my babies, and told myself a woman can't afford to be scared when the light bills due. But that memory, oh mercy, came galloping back today, bold as brass, the day the roofers peeled back those shingles in '97 and found a tangle of army blankets, sardine tins, a kerosene lantern, and a bearded stranger crouched in the shadows. My own daddy, Franklin, missing since '79, looking like a scarecrow in winter wheat. He opened one milky eye, set on me, and breathed, "Don't frighten her. She's my little girl." Even now, the words float around my ribs like a lost hymn, neither comfort nor curse, just there. For 14 years, he kept vigil overhead, calling himself Sentinel of the Rooftop, scratching notes about cough syrup and chimney devils while we lived, laughed, and fought under the same shingles, blind as pups. Some nights I wonder how many bedtime prayers drifted up through the ceiling for him to pocket like fireflies in a jar, and I reckon that's why this story still rattles in my chest like spoons in a drawer, because love and madness can wear the same battered coat, and sometimes the footsteps you fear are just someone trying to keep you safe the only way their cracked mind allows. So pull up a chair, settle that Afghan round your knees, and stay with me a while, neighbor. The house is a little drafty, the tale a mite chilly, but the coffee's hot and the company, well, that's up to you. Ready? Let's lift the attic hatch together and see what else Papa left behind. I reckon if you close your eyes and breathe in the smell of fresh-cut hay, you can just about ride straight back to the summer of '58, when I was a freckle-faced 6-year-old chasing lightning bugs between rows of corn taller than my daddy's Sunday hat. We lived outside the little town of Millbrook, Illinois, where the postmaster knew your birthday and the grocer kept your tab on brown paper pinned above the scale. Mama strung the wash line from the back porch to the lone walnut tree, and every damp sleeve flapping in the breeze was a tiny white flag announcing peace in our yard. Daddy, Franklin Peterson, stood tall as a silo and twice as stubborn, with engine grease under his nails and gospel humming under his breath. He would hoist me onto the bench seat of his Ford pickup and say, "Dolly girl, the world's big enough to hold every dream you dare." I believed him the way a kitten trusts warm milk. Saturday nights brought fried chicken popping in a cast iron skillet, the Opry scratching from the radio, and Mama tapping her foot while she shelled peas. Sunday mornings smelled of mothballs and lavender starch as we marched to church with hymnals clutched like treasures against our ribs. I swore the rhythm of those days would last forever, steady as sunrise, safe as Daddy's arm draped over my shoulder on the walk home past marble angels leaning in the cemetery. School was a one-story brick rectangle with squeaky blackboards. I sat near the window drawing horses and decided the Fox River after thaw felt ocean enough for me. When autumn rolled in with wood smoke and marching band whistles, Daddy carved jack-o'-lanterns into broad-grinned porch guardians, promising they would keep mischief at bay. Back then I figured kindness had muscle, that a good heart could scare off any boogeyman. Even when thunder rattled the screens and the attic board snapped like popcorn, Mama whispered, "Old houses talk, child," and tucked me deeper beneath Grandma's quilt. Yet some nights I woke to Daddy pacing the hallway like a sentry, murmuring to shadows only he could see, and I drifted back to sleep certain heroes never rest. Years laced up their shoes and hurried ahead. I grew taller, skinnier, pinned back my bangs, and practiced writing Mrs. Somebody across notebook margins. Vietnam flickered across black and white television sets. Gasoline climbed toward 30 cents, and boys discovered the twist under gymnasium lights. Through every season, Daddy kept the roof patched, the Chevy coughing along, and my faith shiny as a new penny that goodness still came home for supper. At 17, I kissed Roy Peterson beneath the bleachers, tasted bubble gum and bravado, and thought forever must feel exactly like that. We married in 72 under a sagging potluck tent, strung with bare bulbs, the air smelling of coleslaw and exhaust from Uncle Earl's generator. I told Daddy I would bring my babies back to the old place so the walls could learn new laughter, and he wiped a tear he blamed on pollen. He whispered, "Home's only as strong as the love inside it, Dolly girl. Keep yours lit," and pressed my hand like he was sealing a covenant. I promised with all I had, never imagining how literal he would take those words, or how long a guardian might linger beneath shingles for the sake of a single pledge. Back then, standing in satin shoes on borrowed plywood flooring, I believed tomorrow would blossom bright as a buttercup, and everyone I loved would always come when supper called. Life felt simple, certain, safe. I remember the August heat of 79, like a wet wool blanket no breeze could shake off. The cornfields shimmering as though the sky itself were holding its breath. Roy and I had driven down for Sunday dinner, David still a butter bean kicking under my apron, and Mama fussing that I should put my feet up, when Daddy barreled into the yard in his mud-splashed pickup and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. His eyes, usually gentle as pond water, blazed wild, a kind of fire I'd never seen and never wanted to see again. He marched past us without a word, fists closed, jaw working like he was chewing stones, and disappeared into the old tool shed. Moments later, the barn erupted in orange and black, flames leaping higher than the windmill, while the horses screamed and the hens scattered feathers like snow. Roy dashed for the hose. Mama cried to heaven, and I just stood there frozen, one hand on my belly, because right then I felt a thud inside stronger than any kick. My own heart slamming so hard I thought it might splinter my ribs. I couldn't explain why the world tilted or why a thick hush settled behind the chaos, but something in me whispered, "This is the hinge. Everything swings different now." We found Daddy's wrench set scattered like breadcrumbs, the windows punched out, and on the barn wall, scrawled in grease pencil, 4 words that chilled the sweat off my skin. "It surrounds the house." Sheriff Waters came, shook his head, and said Franklin must have taken leave of his senses, maybe wandered off into the timber. They searched the creeks, the rail yard, the grain silos, nothing but cicadas and rumor. Mama sat on the porch rocker night after night, clutching her rosary so tight the beads left moons in her palms, murmuring, "He'll be back, Dolly girl. He promised." But weeks slid into months. The air turned crisp. David was born, and letters postmarked nowhere never came. The machine shop boxed his tools. The bank sent polite condolences wrapped in overdue notices. Folks in town whispered about shell shock or secret drinking, yet I kept hearing the crackle of that barn fire, seeing his silhouette haloed in sparks, and I wondered if something worse than madness had opened a door inside him. One evening, while folding baby sleepers, I found under Daddy's old recliner a small spiral notebook smelling of smoke and axle grease. Inside were pages of cramped handwriting, scripture verses, weather notes, and peculiar vows like, "I will guard them from the watcher in the rafters." My pulse stuttered. I couldn't explain why my heart beat faster, only that the words felt alive, crawling under my skin. Roy said, "Toss it." Mama said, "Pray over it." But I slid the notebook into my nightstand, a secret weight that kept me awake listening for footsteps that never quite matched the settling boards. That night, I dreamed of Daddy perched atop the house like a crow, arms spread, eyes burning holes through the shingles, and when I woke, I swore I heard a plank creak overhead. In the morning, the dream melted away with the dew, yet an invisible thread had been knotted around our lives. The barn was rebuilt, the fields harvested, but the air inside the old house shifted, thicker somehow, like breath shared with a stranger you can't see. I told myself good hearts always come home, but somewhere deep I began to wonder what happens when love returns, wearing a mask you can't recognize. That question lodged behind every lullaby I sang, every porch light I left burning past midnight, and I reckon that was the moment the attic truly opened, even if none of us could see the latch lift. 2 years after we unpacked the last box, the shine of fresh paint had already faded to peel, and everyday life in Mama's old house turned slow as sorghum yet restless as a colt. The autumn of '85 blew in hard with Dr. Bills, Roy's layoffs at the mill, and a steady drip through the kitchen ceiling that plinked into a coffee tin night and day until it near drove me to holler. Mama's breath grew wheezy, her steps smaller, and she took to sleeping in the parlor, insisting the upstairs hallway echoed with company. I tried to laugh it off, but the laughter never reached my stomach because every few nights a spoon went missing, or we'd find Roy's lunch meat nibbled clean at the edges, like a raccoon had manners enough to slice straight lines. One Tuesday I caught David, now 7, standing under the attic hatch, eyes wide as saucers, whispering he'd heard Grandpa humming, "Rock of Ages." I scolded him for tall tales, yet my hands shook pouring his milk, and I felt a prickly shame, ashamed of believing, ashamed of doubting. Outside, the neighbors started talking about our lawn gone ragged and Roy's truck up on blocks. Inside, Roy snapped that maybe if I managed the pantry better, our groceries wouldn't vanish. Those words stung like nettles because I could organize a cupboard blindfolded, but I kept silent, cheeks hot, afraid anger would burst open and spill secrets even I couldn't name. Nights grew longer. The heater clicked, floorboards sighed, Mama coughed, and somewhere between the rafters a faint scuff shuffled like someone rearranging old memories. I prayed under my breath, "Lord, quiet this house," though part of me feared what silence might reveal. In December, a cold front cracked pipes and our savings both. I pawned my wedding china to patch the roof, while Roy drowned his pride in old Milwaukee behind the shed, coming back smelling of defeat he wouldn't speak aloud. The next morning, I discovered another page torn from a daddy's spiral tucked beneath the bread box. The wind carries whispers of ill intent. Remain vigilant. Sentinel. My knees near buckled. I hid the scrap under my blouse, pulse thudding so loud I worried Mama could hear it over her oxygen machine. That evening, by the glow of the Christmas tree, I faced a forked path only I could see. Tell Roy everything, risk him thinking I'd inherited Daddy's cracked mind, or burn the evidence and live with the tremor of unspoken fear. I stirred hot cocoa, watching marshmallows melt like promises, and chose silence, convincing myself a mother's job was to keep the peace, even if her own heart rattled like sleigh bells in a blizzard. Yet the weight of that choice settled heavy, a hush pregnant with consequence. When Mama passed the following February, the house moaned under funeral footsteps and casserole dishes, and I felt both grief and a strange relief, because the only person who'd halfway believed the unrest upstairs was gone, leaving me between Roy's practical disbelief and an attic that seemed to breathe. At night, folding sheets alone, I caught myself angry at Daddy for abandoning us, and angrier still for maybe never leaving at all. I wondered if love could twist so far it snapped, or if it merely bent into shapes a sane mind refuses to see. The dilemma hardened like ice on the eaves. Confront the shadow and risk shattering what little steadiness we had, or keep doors closed and pray the rattling stayed pole. The summer storm of '97 rolled in like a freight train on a Sunday morning, rattling window panes and peeling shingles off the roof, as though the sky itself meant to read what secrets lay beneath. By the time the clouds limped eastward, every room smelled of wet plaster and blown-in insulation, and I felt a tension in the walls so thick it crackled with every lightning afterimage. 3 days later, 2 roofing men clambered up with tool belts jangling, and I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, thinking the worst of our troubles would be the bill Roy and I could ill afford. David, now 19 and lanky as his grandpa once was, hauled tarps while Lynn passed up boxes of nails. Their laughter on the ladder rained down like confetti, and for a heartbeat I believed we'd outrun the strange hush nesting above us all those years. Then, mid-morning, the hammering stopped. An eerie stillness settled, the kind that presses against your eardrums until your own pulse sounds like thunder. I stepped onto the porch, dish towel in hand, and saw one of the roofers frozen, sheet of plywood half-pried, eyes wide as moon pies. Time hiccuped. The porch clock clicked but did not talk, as if seconds themselves refused to move forward. I called up, voice thin, and in that suspended breath he lifted the board, and what lay beneath spilled out like pages torn from a forbidden book. An army blanket frayed to threads, rust-rimmed cans stacked like short pillars, a stub of candle seared onto a saucer, and behind it all, knees drawn to chest, beard matted, eyes sunken yet fierce, a man I once called Daddy. My heart slammed so hard I felt the porch rails sway. He blinked slow, like waking from a dream, and in a whisper rough as gravel said, "Don't startle her. She's my dolly girl." Every sound vanished. The cicadas, the distant lawnmower, even Lynn's gasp, as though the world had slipped underwater. Memories detonated. The missing peaches, the lullabies in the vents, the grease-penciled warnings. They aligned into a single piercing clarity. For 14 years, the man who'd set our barn ablaze had perched above our lives like some ragged guardian angel, and none of us, not even Mama with her second sight, had truly seen him. I lost grip of the railing, knees buckling, but David's steady arm caught me, and I tasted salt where tears met sweat. Daddy's gaze drifted past me toward the open yard, as if he still scanned for foes only he recognized. Yet in that cracked gaze there was no menace, only the brittle devotion of a mind splintered by purpose. Paramedics arrived, coaxed him down with the soft voices usually reserved for spooked calves. He obeyed, trembling, repeating fragments. "Chimney devil. 317. They're safe now." When his feet touched the grass, I felt something inside me shatter and rearrange at once. Grief for the father I'd mourned, terror for the stranger he'd become, relief that the haunting had a human face, shame that my children had lived beneath a secret I'd half suspected yet dared not confront. As they eased him into the ambulance, the porch clock stuttered back to life, its pendulum taking up the motion it had abandoned, and the ordinary chirp of birds returned cruelly bright. Watching the doors close, I understood that love can warp beneath the weight of delusion until protection resembles imprisonment, and family can fracture in silence louder than any scream. In that moment, I was no longer the daughter who believed good hearts always found their way home. I was a woman who had learned home can hold ghosts that breathe, and the scariest truths are those that wear familiar eyes. I used to think the worst sound a heart could hear was thunder cracking over dry corn. But the hush that settled after the ambulance taillights vanished proved silence can weigh more than any storm. The roofers hammered the attic shut like suturing flesh. Neighbors drifted by with pity pies we never tasted, and every familiar creak grew timid, as though the house itself held its breath now that the secret had been exhaled. Roy drowned his unease in chores, slapping up drywall so thick he claimed even memories couldn't seep through, while I drifted room to room gathering blankets that suddenly smelled of strangers and wondering whether I should feel grateful or betrayed. David and Lynn swallowed our tidy tale about a wanderer seeking shelter. Children cling to stories that tame the dark, and I was too hollow to break their fragile calm. Once a week, I drove 60 miles to the state hospital, a concrete hive buzzing beneath flickering fluorescence, sat across a plastic table from the man who once hoisted me onto carnival ponies, and listened as he asked, almost politely, if the devil still circled the chimney at 317. I'd say no, and watch relief soften his weather-cracked face, a tenderness so fierce my eyes burned, even though no tears fell. 5 years slipped by measured in visitor badges and medication lists until a dawn call informed me Franklin completed his watch in his sleep. The nurse said it like a gentle dismissal, but the phone felt heavier than any newborn. We planted him beside Mama under the walnut tree where summer laundry once danced. The sky was raw linen, the preacher's verses light as straw, and I discovered grief can echo even when the well feels dry, because grief also measures what could never be. Back home, the attic remained mute. The pantry stayed stocked, and yet at 317 my eyes still flew open, my breath holding court with old phantoms. Absence, I learned, has its own footsteps. Eventually, we sold the house to newlyweds eager for open concept dreams. I left the Sentinel's journals boxed in the cellar, a time capsule of blurred love and cracked logic, too tender to torch and too heavy to keep. Our new ranch has ceilings so low there's nowhere for secrets to perch, yet habit lifts my gaze whenever a board murmurs. The air answers with nothing more sinister than settling joists, and that emptiness, oddly, feels companionable. Faith, once bright as stained glass, has weathered to sea glass, still colored, edges smoothed, but no longer pretending to be perfect. I talk to God in murmurs now, the way you chat with someone rocking beside you who might doze off mid-sentence. Trust, too, is quieter. I believe in kindness, but I listen for the rustle behind it. Even so, I've come to understand a heart can mend around a void the way vines cling to a missing fence, shaping themselves to what isn't there. Some evenings I sit on the porch with a cup of decaf, watching dusk tuck itself around the trees, and I feel the hush settle like a quilt, lighter than back then, roomy enough to breathe. I am not the girl who thought goodness always comes home for supper. I'm a woman who knows love can camp in an attic and still call itself holy. Yet I hum lullabies into the dark anyway, because hope, like moonlight through thin curtains, hardly needs permission to slip inside. I was pinning socks to the backyard line last spring, just ordinary white crew socks and a couple of dish towels flapping like little parade flags, when a gust slipped under the lid of the storage box where Franklin's journals sleep and lifted one ragged page clear into the sunlight. It cartwheeled across the grass like it had an appointment, so I hobbled after it, laughing at my own joints, and when I finally smoothed the yellow sheet against my apron, a line leapt up at me as though it had been waiting all these years. A house stays warm so long as one heart keeps watch. I must have skimmed that sentence a dozen times, but right then it struck fresh, the way a hymn you've sung since childhood suddenly feels written just for you. I stood there, wind tugging my skirt, and realized I'd spent so much breath cursing the shadow daddy became that I'd forgotten the coal of intention glowing beneath his madness, the urge to guard, to keep someone safe. It wasn't forgiveness, nothing so grand, but it was a crack wide enough for a seed of usefulness to drop in. That evening, I brewed decaf and called the community center to ask if they still ran the Thursday meal for folks who sleep rough under the viaduct. The director said volunteers were scarce and hope scarcer. Well, I told her, wiping counter crumbs into my palm, I know my way around a soup pot, and I can listen better than most radios. The first night I ladled stew into dented thermoses for men whose eyes darted like daddy's once did. A tremor of old fear twitched in my spine, but it faded under the weight of their shy thank yous. One fellow, name of Clarence, though everyone called him Stepper on account of a limp, asked if I'd mind saying his real name out loud, just so he could hear it the way his mama used to. I spoke it slow, soft, and watched his shoulders drop 2 inches. Right there, I understood that remembering a person's chosen name is another kind of keeping watch. Week by week, the center's folding tables filled. Veterans who talked to ceiling tiles, women who traced invisible shapes on their sleeves, teens who pretended not to care how warm the cornbread was. I showed them how to toast the ends of bread so nothing went to waste, and they showed me how a lopsided grin can mend a frayed evening. I never mentioned Franklin, but I carried his line like a pocket stone, rubbing it smooth each time the door creaked and another weary soul shuffled in. Somewhere between wiping counters and teaching Stepper my trick for stretching chili with sweet potato, I felt a slow-burning warmth settle where the hush used to live. It wasn't the bright blaze of certainty I'd known as a girl. It was gentler, like embers that glow steady after the flames lie down. Roy noticed it first, caught me humming Rock of Ages while scrubbing the stock pot and said, "Haven't heard that in years." I shrugged, but the melody lingered. I reckon hope doesn't always ride in on trumpets. Sometimes it slips through the back door wearing an apron and carrying day-old bread. These days, when the porch clock taps 3:17, I still wake, but instead of listening for attic footsteps, I pray for every soul whose watch is lonely, then roll over and catch another wink. Daddy's sentence sits framed above the new stove, ink fading, paper fragile, yet its pulse is strong enough to light the pilot in my chest, a reminder that even cracked hearts can pass along a little warmth if someone's willing to tend the flame. I woke 3 weeks ago to the soft hush of dawn drifting through the curtains, that blue-gray hour when even shadows seemed to pause, and I knew plain as the quilt over my knees that the attic chapter of my life had 1 page left to turn. No trumpet, no thunder, just a steady heartbeat of certainty saying, "Dolly, it's time." I dressed slow, brewed a cup of Maxwell House, then lifted the storage lid where Franklin's remaining journals rested like sleeping birds, their covers curled from humidity and years of my delay. All this time I kept them boxed as proof of something I couldn't name, maybe loyalty, maybe punishment, but each visit to the shelter, each face that softened under a kind word, had chipped away the notion that memory should be a chain. So I gathered those notebooks, tucked them into a canvas tote, and drove to Millbrook Cemetery, the walnut tree's branches fanning out above Mama's stone the way her hands once shielded my eyes from bright sun. The ground was damp with spring promise. I knelt, pressing one palm to the earth as if to greet her, then opened the tote. Page after page rustled like dry leaves, devils by chimneys, cough syrup for David, hymns scrawled sideways in margins. My throat tightened. Lord, it ached, but tears finally rose clean. Not the hot grief of yesteryear, rather a gentle rain that smells of tilled soil and second chances. I whispered, "Daddy, you kept watch the only way you knew. I kept silent the only way I knew. Let's lay both burdens down." With a garden trowel I'd brought for the task, I dug a shallow bed between their markers and eased the journals in, covering them with loam until the pages stilled. Then I planted a handful of milkweed seeds, food for monarchs, creatures that journey far yet somehow find their way back, and smoothed the dirt flat, palm trembling, heart steady. No choir rose, no light split the clouds, but a robin hopped near, cocked its head, and sang a clear note that felt like permission to stand again. Driving home, the air inside the car felt roomier, as though the tote's emptiness echoed a new space in my chest where fear once nested. That afternoon, I called David and Lynn, told them in plain words, not every grisly detail, just enough truth to honor their right to know, that the stranger in our attic had been their grandfather, a good man cracked by war and worry, who loved bigger than his mind could hold. David's silence on the phone was long but not sharp. Lynn's exhale sounded like a window opening. "Thanks for telling us, Mom," they said together, and I felt threads once frayed begin to braid. The next Thursday at the shelter, I taped a fresh card above the stove that reads, "Keep watch with kindness." And when Clarence, Stepper, asked who wrote it, I smiled and said, "A fellow who believed houses and hearts stay warm the very same way." That night, for the first time in decades, I slept straight through 317. I woke to sunlight pooling on the pillow and realized the hush had lifted. What remained was an ordinary morning inviting ordinary joy. I poured my coffee, glanced at the lone framed sentence above the stove. A house stays warm so long as one heart keeps watch, and felt no sting, only a soft thrum like kettle water just before it sings. I chose to live forward, child. No ledger of what-ifs, no fistful of regrets. Just one weathered woman stepping into each day with sleeves rolled and porch light on for whoever needs a little warmth. Turns out, that's how you keep watch and keep living, all in the same breath. I've spent many an evening on this porch with the quilt tucked over my knees, letting the cicadas stitch their hum through the hush and weighing the difference between a house that creaks from age and a heart that creaks from secrets. What I've come to know is simple enough to fit on a cracked saucer, yet it took a lifetime to brew. Love is sturdy, but it can warp. Truth is painful, but it can ventilate a room stuck shut for years. And silence? Well, silence is neither friend nor foe. Just a hallway you have to choose whether to walk. Back when Mama warned, "Something's walking these halls," I thought courage meant shooing the shadows away. Now I see courage is sitting down beside the shadow, tipping your hat, and asking what it needs. Because every rattling vent, every misplaced spoon, every quiver in Daddy's scrawl was a knock on the door of my understanding, and I kept double latching out of fear I'd unravel. Turns out nothing unravels faster than a knot pulled tight. Once I opened the box, delivered those journals to the earth, and spoke my truth to the children, the knot loosened of its own accord, easy as thread slipping through thimble-worn fingers. That taught me a home, be it clapboard walls or the rib cage under your blouse, must breathe, or it will mildew. People tell me, "Dolly, I could never face a revelation like yours." And I smile, because we all harbor our own addicts. The unsent letter, the forgiven but not forgotten slight, the question we're scared to ask in case the answer rearranges every stick of furniture in our mind. Yet the longer you leave that hatch shut, the louder the house protests. I'm no preacher and surely no saint, but I've learned a person can survive the ceiling coming down if they've got a pocket full of mercy and a good neighbor to hand them a broom. And mercy, child, starts at home. I had to grant it to a father whose love got bent out of shape, and to a younger me who thought quiet sacrifice was the same as strength. Once I did, I noticed the world shimmering with small mercies. Clarence answering to his given name, Lynn phoning just to describe sunset colors, Roy humming off-key while patching the bird feeder. That's the sort of wealth you miss when you're busy guarding hurt, like it's heirloom china. So here's the gist, served plain. If there's a creak in your life, you keep calling wind. Maybe set down your coffee, climb the step stool of honesty, and lift that hatch, gentle but firm. What tumbles out might scare you, might sadden you, might even save you, but I'd wager my last jar of peach preserves it'll let fresh air through. And sweetheart, if that attic turns out empty, at least you'll sleep sound knowing the ghosts were only in the story you told yourself. Either way, you win back your night's rest. I'm living proof you can patch a roof, mend a heart, and find music in the rafters once the dust settles. So, neighbor to neighbor, let me set this question on your doorstep like a warm loaf wrapped in wax paper. What creak have you been calling harmless, and are you ready to find out what's truly making the noise? Maybe, just maybe, it's time you quit waiting for the roof to cave in and climb up there yourself. Well, neighbor, if you've rocked beside me this long, bless your steady heart. Here we sit in the violet hush, fireflies stitching tiny lanterns through the yard, my coffee gone lukewarm, and your curiosity still warm. And I find myself wanting to press one last thought into your palm, the way Mama used to slip peppermints into church hymnals. I've shared how a barn blaze, a vanished father, and 14 years of attic whispers bent the grain of my life. I've told you how grief can masquerade as protection, and how silence can rattle louder than any scream. Yet the marrow of the story isn't nailed to the past. It hovers right now over every choice we make about what to guard and what to release, about which doors to bolt and which to open, even if the hinges groan. I used to think love was a straight road home, lit by porch lamps and Sunday promises. Now I see it's more like a wandering melody, sometimes sweet, sometimes cracked. But if you lean in, really listen, you'll hear the same earnest note threading through. The question that keeps me company on quiet nights is simple. When love slips away in a shape you don't recognize, are you willing to meet it where it lands, even if it perches in the rafters instead of pulling up a chair? Because that answer has the muscle to change the tilt of a whole life. So let me ask you plain, right here beneath the low hum of summer. Do you reckon true love is duty-bound to circle back, no matter how tattered its wings? Or is there a moment when letting it fly on is the deeper kindness? Ponder that while the screen door clacks behind you tonight. Some folks will say forgiveness is the key. Others swear boundaries keep the roof from falling. Maybe the real wisdom lies in knowing which beam to reinforce and which one to replace, and having the courage to swing the hammer yourself. I can't hand you a tidy moral, child, but I can tell you this: a heart that stays curious stays warm. And sometimes, on the stillest evenings, when the clock drifts past 3:17 and the world feels pinned under its own quiet, I sense, more than hear, a gentle shift in the attic of memory, as though Daddy's boots shuffle one last time to be sure the roof's holding. I smile, roll over, and let the night cradle me, because I've learned the watch isn't mine alone anymore. We all take turns keeping the light on for one another. Now, as you step back into your own house with its own private creaks, I hope you feel a little braver about listening to whatever stirs above the ceiling or inside your chest. And if this story settled into you like a warm coal, tap that like button or scribble your thoughts below. Tell me, do you believe real love must always find its way home? Or does it sometimes bless us by staying gone? I'll be here on the porch, quilt ready, coffee reheated, curious as ever to hear your answer. And who knows, maybe in the hush between your reply and my next sip, I'll catch the faintest echo of boots on an old wooden beam, reminding me that some guardians never truly leave. They just learn to whisper softer.